The air in the forward observation post smelled of damp soil and ozone. Kale stood at the main console, his long, slender fingers moving with quiet precision over the glowing screens. His opalescent skin reflected the soft blue light of the displays. As a Velen tactical analyst, order was his comfort. The post, called Epsilon 7, was a collection of prefabricated buildings tucked into the jungle of Sylvanus Prime. The data streams were clean. The UGC artillery batteries orbiting high above responded to his commands without delay. It was a good, logical system. Then the human transport arrived. The ship set down with a thud, not the gentle hum of Velen landers. The ramp dropped and they came out. They moved with a noisy, uneven energy that immediately put Kale on edge. They were not tall like Velens. They were solid, their faces expressing a wild range of feelings he could name from his studies but could not understand experiencing so openly. They laughed, clapping each other on the back. They shouted names across the landing pad. It was chaos. Their leader, Sergeant Jihuan, approached. He was calm, at least. He gave a short, polite nod. "Analyst Kale? I am Sergeant Jihuan. My team is here to support the ground defense." Kale returned the nod, his large, solid blue eyes unblinking. "Your deployment data has been integrated. I will coordinate orbital strikes based on your positional feeds. Please ensure your soldiers stay within the marked sensor grids. Straying causes targeting errors." Jihuan's face showed a mild expression, like a still pond. "We'll stick to the grids. But the jungle has its own ideas." He looked past Kale at his team. Sumin set up the medbay in that structure. Taeshik, check the perimeter guns. Micha, get me a link to the command net. They moved, but not with the uniform discipline of Velen soldiers. The medic, Sumin, stopped to help a smaller UGC soldier lift a heavy crate on her way. The engineer, Taeshik, was already talking to himself, running a hand over the barrel of a large cannon. The comm specialist, Micha, winked at a confused-looking drone controller as she walked by. Kale felt a deep unease. This emotional noise was a weakness. Concern for others was a distraction. In combat, logic and clear purpose were what kept you alive. Over the next few days, his feeling did not change. He watched them. During meals, they shared food from small personal pouches, offering bits to each other. They told loud stories where the point seemed to be the act of laughing itself. They asked Kale questions about his homeworld, about Velen art and music. He answered in short, factual sentences. Their interests seemed illogical. They were soldiers on a hostile world. Their focus should be on the enemy, the Kthari swarm, not on social bonding. The first attack came at dawn. The warning sirens tore through the quiet. Kale was at his console in seconds. Blips of red light appeared at the edge of the sensor range. Kthari skirmishers, small, fast, and many. His training took over. He began plotting firing solutions for the orbital guns. "Sergeant, hostiles at Grid 7 Alpha, coming fast," he said. His voice flat. He expected panic, or at least a flurry of shouted orders. Instead, he heard Jihuan's calm voice over the comms. "Acknowledged. Moving to intercept. Micha, light them up for our friend in the chair." A moment later, new data flooded Kale's screen. Detailed movement patterns, heat signatures, even probable paths. It was more than he asked for. It was insightful. "Data received," he said, and fired the first orbital strike. A distant boom shook the ground. Through the post's external cameras, he watched the humans fight. They did not form a perfect, static line. They moved in pairs, flowing through the misty trees. When a Kthari warrior charged at Taeshik's position, Sumin, who was supposed to be in the rear, fired 3 sharp rounds from her rifle, dropping it before it got close. No order was given. She just saw it and acted. Jihuan was at the center of it all. He did not yell. He spoke in short, clear phrases. "Tay, left flank is heavy. Drift back 10 meters. Micha, their controller is in the tall fungus cluster. Mark it for Kale." Kale saw the mark, input the data, and another precise lance of energy fell from the sky. The cluster exploded. The fight was over in minutes. The humans came back to the post, breathing hard but talking quietly. They checked each other for injuries. Sumin fussed over a shallow cut on Taeshik's arm. They had won easily. But Kale felt cold. He reviewed the battle data. The human movements were not in the manuals. Their reactions were too fast, too adapted. They fought like a single animal, but one that could change its shape at will. Jihuan's tactics were perfect, but they came from a place Kale's logical models could not predict. He approached the sergeant, who was cleaning his weapon. Your unit's coordination is efficient, but it does not follow standard UGC combined arms doctrine. Jihuan looked up, his expression still unreadably calm. Doctrine is a good map, but the ground is always new. He smiled a small smile. We read the ground. Kale went back to his console. The post was secure. The mission was a success. Yet, for the first time, a seed of doubt was planted in his mind. He had believed emotion was a flaw that reduced combat effectiveness. These humans were saturated with emotion, and they had just been more effective than any Velen unit of similar size he had seen. A quiet dread, cold and unfamiliar, began to curl in his stomach. He did not understand them. And in war, not understanding your ally could be as dangerous as not understanding your enemy. The jungle outside was quiet again. But Kale felt less certain of his orderly world than he had just an hour before. The silence after the fight did not last. The Kthari swarm did not like to lose ground. Soon, the attacks came more often. They were testing the defenses. The sounds of distant explosions became part of the day, like the strange calls of the jungle birds. The humans, to Kale's continued confusion, settled into this new rhythm as if it were normal. It was during the quiet times between alarms that Kale's dread began to grow roots. He watched them, not as soldiers now, but as a strange puzzle he needed to solve. One evening, he saw Sumin in the medical bay. A young UGC soldier from a different species was there. He had a bad burn on his arm. The soldier was clearly in pain, his large eyes wide with fear. Sumin spoke in a voice Kale had never heard from a human before. It was soft, like the hum of the lights. She did not just treat the wound. She talked to him. She asked about his home, his family unit. She told him a silly story about a mistake she made in training. She made his pain seem small and temporary. The soldier calmed down. His shaking stopped. When he left, he walked taller. Kale found this illogical. The emotional energy spent was a drain. A Velen medic would have been efficient and sterile, which was correct. Comfort was not a medical procedure. Minutes later, the same Sumin walked outside. Taeshik was there, taking apart the large rotary cannon he called the Peacemaker. It was a brutal piece of machinery designed to tear apart swarms. Sumin sat on an ammo crate next to him. She did not speak. She simply watched him work, her gentle expression still on her face. She handed him tools when he needed them. It was a scene of quiet companionship. But the scene was wrong. The tool she handed him was a power driver used to secure the firing chamber. The cannon's barrels, now clean, would soon spin and fire thousands of rounds. The calm medic and the terrible weapon existed in the same space at the same time. Kale's mind could not put the two images together. Then, Taeshik began to hum. It was a low, slow sound, a tune with a rising and falling pattern. It was not like the loud songs the humans sometimes sang. This was different. It was sad and beautiful at once. It cut through the jungle sounds and the distant thumps of war. Later, Kale asked him about it. The sound you make, is it a battle chant? Taeshik looked up from his work, a faint smile on his face. No. It is an old song, from my grandmother's home. It is about a bird that flies over a field after a storm, looking for its nest. A song about loss, Kale stated. And looking, Taeshik corrected gently. Always looking. He went back to polishing a barrel, and the humming started again. The dread in Kale's stomach tightened. This man could hold the memory of a lost bird and the weight of a weapon meant for mass slaughter in his mind at the same time. They did not conflict. They seemed to feed one another. Micha, the comm specialist, was the most confusing. She was sharp and fast with her words. She joked often, but her jokes had a dark edge that made Kale pause. One moment, she was showing him images on a small device. They were of smaller humans, her family, she said. She pointed to a young girl. My sister's kid. Wants to be a pilot. Her smile was warm. Then, an alert chimed.
Micha's my vanits?
It did not change into a frown. It simply disappeared, replaced by a flat, focused blankness. She looked at her tactical screen. Kthari scouts are poking at the western ridge. Weak signal. Trying to find our sensor blind spots. Her fingers flew over the controls. I can trick them. Make them think the blind spot is here. She pointed to a map location. When they group up, we hit them. Hard. She was creating a trap. Using deception to maximize enemy casualties. She did this while the image of the small human child who wanted to be a pilot was still glowing on her device beside her. She felt no contradiction. Kale could stay silent no longer. He found Ji-hwan looking at a physical map, making notes with an old ink pen. Sergeant, I require understanding. Ji-hwan put the pen down. Of what? Your soldiers. Their behavior. Medic Sumin offers deep kindness. Then she sits calmly beside a weapon of destruction. Taeshik hums songs of loss while maintaining a tool for creating more loss. Micha plans lethal traps while looking at images of her young. This is not logical. It is emotional whiplash. It is unstable. Ji-hwan was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Kale with those calm, dark eyes. You see it as two different things. Kindness and killing. The song and the gun. The family and the trap. They are different things, Kale insisted. They are opposites. To you, maybe, Ji-hwan said. To us, they are connected. The song reminds Taeshik what he cares about. The weapon is how he protects the idea of that song. Micha's family is why she is so good at making traps. The stronger the care, the stronger the defense. He picked his pen back up. It is all the same thing. Protecting one requires the other. The words hung in the air. Kale turned them over in his mind. The stronger the care, the stronger the defense. It was a terrifying equation. It meant their compassion was not a separate, weak thing. It was the fuel. It was the source of their terrible efficiency in battle. The dread was no longer a cold knot. It was a realization, seeping into him like the jungle's damp cold. He looked at Ji-hwan, this calm, still man. What did he care about so deeply that it would become the source of his own terrible strength? The alarm blared again, sharp and urgent. The humans moved instantly, their moments of kindness and memory shut away. Their faces became focused, clean of emotion. They were soldiers again. But Kale now knew the truth. The kindness was not gone. It was just buried, turned inward, where it powered the machine. And that made them more frightening than any unfeeling Kthari swarm. The big attack came not long after. It was not a test. It was a wave. The Kthari swarm wanted Epsilon 7 gone. The first sign was the drones. They fell from the sky like metal rain, exploding against the energy shields until the shields failed with a final, groaning crackled. Kale's world became a storm of red lights and screaming data. He was pinned to his console, his long fingers moving faster than he thought possible. He called down orbital strikes, but the swarm was too close now. The big guns in space could not hit them without hitting the post. Close support only, he yelled into the comms, his normally flat voice sharp with strain. Danger close. He heard Ji-hwan's calm reply, broken by the sound of rapid gunfire. Understood. Switch to perimeter defense. Micha, blind them. Taeshik, hold the north gap. Kale switched views on his screens to the external cameras. The jungle was alive with movement. Kthari warriors, all sharp edges and chitinous shells, poured from the trees. They moved as one mind, a single purpose. They were logical, overwhelmed with numbers. The humans did not follow that logic. Kale watched, unable to look away. Taeshik stood at the north barrier, his heavy cannon roaring. It was not a constant sound. It was bursts of thunder carefully timed. He was not just firing. He was hurting them, forcing the swarm into a narrow path. Micha had launched smoke grenades and sonic screamers into the mass, not to kill, but to confuse their shared senses. The swarm's perfect unity began to fray at the edges. Then, a new signal flashed on Kale's medical monitor. A life sign, pulsing weakly. It was from Private Day, one of the human soldiers. His icon was deep in the red zone, blinking on the map near the ruined East Sensor Tower. He was down, and his vital signs were fading. Kale made the logical assessment instantly. He opened the command channel.
Sergeant Yevan.
Private Day is down. Grid 8 Charlie. Biosigns critical. Probability of survival under current combat stress. Less than 4%. He paused, the numbers clear in his mind. The East Sector is being overrun. A rescue attempt carries a high probability of further unit loss. Tactical recommendation. Acknowledge loss and consolidate defense. There was a burst of static. Then Ji-hwan's voice came through. It was different. The calm was still there, but underneath it was something hard, like stone. Say again his location. Grid 8 Charlie. But Sergeant, the numbers. I heard the numbers. The line went quiet for 2 seconds. When Ji-hwan spoke again, his words were simple and final. We're not leaving him. It was illogical. It was emotional. It was a terrible mistake. You are risking the entire post for one life, Kale argued, his own calm breaking. No, Ji-hwan corrected, his voice like iron. We are protecting the entire idea. Now, give me fire on my mark. South of the tower. 3-second burst. Kale felt a freezing chill. The idea? What idea? But he was a soldier. He input the coordinates. Ready. What happened next was not a rescue. It was a lesson in fury. Ji-hwan did not order a full retreat to the fallen soldier. He ordered a brutal, punishing push forward. He used Day's position as bait. Taeshik, suppress the west approach. Sumin, you're with me. Micha, light the path and jam everything they send after us. Kale watched on the cameras as Ji-hwan and Sumin moved. They did not run. They moved with a terrible, efficient speed from cover to cover. Ji-hwan's rifle spoke in short, precise taps. Every shot had a purpose. A Kthari node warrior directing smaller units fell. Then another. He was decapitating the swarm's local mind. Sumin was right behind him, her medical pack on her back. She fired her rifle with one hand while throwing a small device with the other. It was a field bandage injector, but it was also a sensor beacon. She was fighting and marking the way at the same time. They reached Day. Sumin dropped to her knees, ignoring the plasma fire that cracked the air above her. She began working, her hands a blur of injectors and sealant foam. But the swarm saw the weakness. They pushed harder toward the tower. Ji-hwan stood over them. He fired until his rifle's power cell died. He did not flinch. He drew his sidearm, a heavy, solid slug thrower. The sound was loud and final in the electronic din. He fired again and again, each shot knocking a Kthari warrior back. Kale saw his face on the camera feed. The calm was gone, not replaced by anger, but by something else. Cold, terrifying focus. His eyes were not wild. They were like dark ice, seeing everything, calculating everything. He was not just fighting to survive. He was fighting to punish the thing that had hurt his soldier. Kale. Ji-hwan's voice came, steady over the gunfire.
Orbital marker.
On my position. 5-second fuse. You are at the position. Kale yelled. Do it. Kale input the command, his hands trembling. He fired. A streak of light fell from the sky. It hit 20 meters south of the tower. The ground erupted in a wave of dirt and fire. The blast threw Ji-hwan and the others to the ground. It vaporized the advancing Kthari group. In the sudden, ringing silence, Ji-hwan got up. He helped Sumin lift Day onto a stretcher. They moved back to the main post, step by step, covered by Taeshik's renewed fire. Back inside, the doors sealed. Sumin rushed Day to the medbay. Taeshik slumped against a wall, breathing hard. Ji-hwan walked to the command console. His face was smeared with dirt and soot. The cold focus was gone. The calm pool had returned to his eyes. He looked at Kale. Thank you for the fire. Kale could not speak. He just nodded. He looked at the screens. The swarm was pulling back, confused and hurt. The post was safe. The rescue had succeeded against all logic. But Kale felt no victory. He felt only the heavy, solid weight of his dread. He had seen it now. The direct line. Jihuan's care for his soldier was not separate from his violence. It was the cause of it. The deeper the care, the more terrible and creative the violence it could justify. The numbers in Kale's head meant nothing against that truth. He had just helped bombard his own ally to save a single life. And it had worked. He looked at the humans, battered but alive. They were not just soldiers. They were monsters and angels, and they decided which one to be based on what they loved. It was the most frightening thing he had ever witnessed. The post was quiet again. The heavy attacks had stopped. The Kthari swarm had been hurt badly. They would need time to regroup. A tense, tired calm settled over Epsilon 7. The air still smelled of smoke and burned things. Kale sat at his console. The screens showed normal readings. His hands were still. Inside, his mind was a storm. He kept seeing it. Jihuan's cold eyes. The orbital strike called down on his own head. The simple, terrible words were not leaving him. The logic of it was broken, but the result was undeniable. They had won. They had saved their man. He needed to understand. The dread was a solid thing inside him now, a cold weight. It wasn't fear of the humans. It was fear of the universe that could create them. A species that could hold such opposing forces in one mind without tearing itself apart. He left the command center. The main area of the post was damaged. Walls were scarred from weapons fire. A few smaller drones were making repairs. The humans were not there. A quiet instinct told him to look for Jihuan. He found him outside, behind the ruined mess hall. This area was not strategic. It had no guns, no sensors. It was just a small space between two buildings open to the sky. Kale stopped at the corner and watched. Jihuan was on his knees in the mud. He was not wearing his helmet. His hands were dirty. In front of him was a patch of torn-up ground. The fighting, or maybe the shockwave from the orbital blast, had ripped through this little spot. The native plants were torn from the soil. They were just small, hardy ferns with silver-edged leaves. Jihuan was not surveying damage. He was gardening. He had a small tool from a survival kit. Carefully, he was digging small holes in the wet soil. He picked up the fallen ferns, one by one. He gently placed their roots back into the earth and pressed the soil firm around them. His movements were slow, focused. There was a reverence to it. Kale watched, confused. This was a waste of energy. These plants were not useful. They were not food. They provided no cover. They were just wild things. Yet, the sergeant treated them with more care than some soldiers treated their weapons. Jihuan spoke. His voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear. He was not talking to himself. He was talking to the plants. There you go, he murmured to a small, battered fern. Deep roots. You'll be okay. He moved to another. Sorry about the noise. It wasn't for you. Kale must have made a sound, a step in the mud. Jihuan's head turned slightly, but his hands did not stop working. Analyst Kale. Sergeant, Kale said. He walked closer. He looked at the plants, then at Jihuan's muddy hands. This activity is not in the post-maintenance log. A small, tired smile touched Jihuan's lips. No, I suppose it isn't. It serves no tactical purpose, Kale stated. He needed the logic. No, Jihuan agreed. He sat back on his heels, looking at the repaired patch of ferns. They were here before us. This is their place. We came and fought our war here. We tore up their ground. He wiped his hands on his pants, leaving dark streaks. They'll be here after we're gone. Doesn't seem right, them getting torn up for our fight. They didn't choose any of this. Kale stood very still. The words settled in the air. They didn't choose any of this. He looked from the ferns to Jihuan's face. He saw the same man who had coldly calculated an orbital strike on his own position. The same man who had just hours ago been a figure of pure, terrifying violence. Now he was showing tenderness to insignificant plants. And suddenly, the last piece clicked into place in Kale's mind. It was not a contradiction. It was the same line. Ji-hwan drew a circle in his mind. Inside that circle, he placed things that were worthy. A wounded soldier, a memory in a song, picture of a child, patch of native ferns. They were all the same. They were things that should be protected. The strength of the protection did not depend on the thing's strategic value. It depended on its worth to the human. The violence was not the opposite of the care. It was the direct result of it. The ferocity he had seen in the battle was the same energy as the gentleness he saw now. It all came from the same source, the need to defend the circle. The dread crystallized into a clean, sharp understanding. He was not looking at a flawed, emotional species. He was looking at a species that decided what mattered, and then moved heaven and earth, literally, to guard it. Their morality was not about right and wrong in a big, universal sense. It was personal. It was about what was theirs to protect. "You make a list," Kale said softly, the realization dawning on him. "In your mind. A list of things that are yours." Ji-hwan looked up at him, his dark eyes thoughtful. He gave a slow nod. "You could call it that. And for the things on that list," Kale continued, the chill spreading through him, "there is no limit to what you will do. No logic too extreme. No cost too high." Ji-hwan stood up. He looked at the ferns, now neatly replanted. "For the things outside that list," he said, his voice calm again, "we can be very logical. We can make deals. We can retreat. We can calculate." He met Kale's gaze. "But for the things inside it? No, there is no calculation. Only the result." Kale finally understood the true source of his dread. The Kthari swarm was a mindless force. You could predict it. You could break its logic. But how do you predict what a human will put inside his circle? How do you calculate the fury that will come if you harm it? Ji-hwan would call an orbital strike on himself for a soldier. What would he do for these ferns if the enemy tried to burn them? Kale did not know. And that was the most frightening thing of all. He looked at the small, silver-edged plants, standing straight again in the mud. They were just plants. But now, because of a human's choice, they felt important. They felt like a line drawn in the soil. "I understand," Kale said, though he did not fully. He understood enough. He understood the danger. Ji-hwan nodded, picking up his tool. "Good," he said simply. He walked back toward the post, leaving Kale alone with the garden and the heavy, new weight of his knowledge. The evacuation ship arrived 2 days later. It descended through the gray sky, a blocky, practical vessel. The fighting had moved on from Epsilon 7. The mission was over. Kale watched the humans pack. They moved with the same efficient energy as before, but they were quieter now. They had lost a part of themselves here, even in victory. Private Day was on a medical stretcher, stable but unconscious. Suman stayed close to him, checking his readings every few minutes. Kale gathered his own things. His data crystals, his personal console. They felt lighter than they had before. The knowledge he carried now had no weight, but it filled him up completely. As they walked up the ramp into the ship, Kale saw Ji-hwan pause. The sergeant turned and looked back at the scarred post, the broken trees, the mud. His eyes went to the corner behind the mess hall, though he could not see it from here. He gave a small, almost invisible nod. Then he turned and helped a young Velen technician, who was struggling with a heavy sensor box, up the ramp. The act was simple, automatic. Inside the transport, the humans found seats. They did not celebrate. They talked in low voices. Taeshik leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes. Micha scrolled through her messages. Suman sat next to Day's stretcher, her hand resting on its frame. They looked tired, normal, almost gentle. Kale stared at them. He saw the kindness on Suman's face. He saw the quiet exhaustion on Taeshik's. He saw Ji-hwan offering a water pouch to the Velen technician. They looked nothing like the terrifying, calculating force he had witnessed. That was the most unsettling part of all. The monster and the neighbor were the same person. You never knew which one you were looking at until you stepped on something inside their circle. The flight to the command ship was smooth and quiet. The dread inside Kale had settled. It was not fear anymore. It was a cold, clear understanding. On the massive UGC command ship, everything was clean and bright. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and metal. It was order restored. Kale was summoned for a debriefing immediately. He stood in a neat, white room before Admiral Nix, a senior Velen officer. Nix's opalescent skin shimmered under the lights. His large, violet eyes scanned the reports. Analyst Kale, Nix began, his voice a model of logical calm. The post held beyond projections. Enemy casualties at Epsilon 7 were 63% higher than calculated, with minimal friendly losses after the initial wounding of Private Day. Your coordination was adequate. The human unit's combat effectiveness appears to be the key variable. The word stuck in Kale's mind. Effectiveness. It was a clean, sterile word. It described a machine. With respect, Admiral, Kale said, his own voice sounding strange to him. Effectiveness is the wrong metric. Nix's head tilted. Explain. They are not effective, Kale said, choosing his words with care. Effectiveness implies a measured input for a desired output. They are invested. They do not fight to achieve a tactical goal. They fight to protect what they decide is worthy. The goal is just the shape that protection takes that day. The Admiral was silent for a moment. You are describing emotional motivation. This is known. It makes them unpredictable but potent. No, Kale insisted, thinking of the garden in the mud. It is not just motivation. It is the core of their tactic. We fight to restore a logical order. They fight to preserve a personal one. The Kthari swarm did not just attack a post. They attacked a soldier inside the human circle. They made it personal. That was their fatal error. You cannot calculate against that. You can only trigger it or avoid it. Admiral Nix made a dismissive gesture, a faint ripple of his long fingers. You are extrapolating from limited data. The human psychological profile notes their emotional drives. We factor it in as a force multiplier. Kale knew he was not getting through. The Admiral saw the humans as a tool with an interesting quirk. He did not see the terrifying truth. Kale bowed his head slightly. Of course, Admiral. Dismissed, he walked the quiet, orderly halls back to his assigned quarters. The dread was now a lonely thing. He had seen the truth of the universe, and no one else understood. The humans were the most dangerous and the most compassionate beings in the galaxy, and which side you saw depended entirely on where you stood in relation to the things they loved. He entered his small room. It was perfect. A bed, a desk, a data port. He sat at the desk and activated his personal console. He opened his tactical analysis software. He looked at the old models, the clean algorithms that predicted enemy movements, resource depletion, and logical surrender points. They were beautiful in their way, and they were now incomplete. He created a new file. He named it Human Proportional Response Factor. He began to build a new variable. It was not a number you could easily plug in. It was a warning flag, a conditional statement. It began with a simple prompt: identify primary emotional investment, PEI, of human unit. PEI may be personnel, location, cultural artifact, abstract ideal. Below that, he wrote, if PEI is directly threatened, discard standard predictive models. Threat response will be asymptotically scalable, tactically creative, and will prioritize destruction of threatening entity over all other objectives, including self-preservation. Logical cost-benefit analysis is non-operative. He paused, his fingers over the screen. He added one more line, thinking of a still pond of a man kneeling in the mud. Note, the most dangerous human is not the one who is angry. It is the one who is calm and has something to protect. He saved the file. It was not a perfect tool. Could not predict what a human would love, but it could predict the fury that would come if you harmed it. And it would remind him, every time he saw a human soldier smile or offer help, of the other side of that coin. Outside his door, he could hear the sounds of the ship, the hum of engines, the quiet talk of crew members. Somewhere on this ship, Jihuan was probably drinking tea. Sumin was checking on her patient. Taeshik was humming a sad song. Kale felt no safer here than he had in the jungle. The jungle just had different walls. He finally understood his first taste of dread. It was not the fear of humans. It was the awe and terror of realizing that in a cold, logical universe, the most powerful force was a heart that decided to care, and the terrible will that came with it. Life on the command ship, the UGC Sentinel, returned to a rhythm. It was a rhythm of data, briefings, and the soft hum of interstellar travel. Kale performed his duties. His reports were precise. His analyses were sharp. But he was different now. The other Velans sensed it. He was quieter. He spent more time observing the human contingent on board, who were being reassigned after their recovery period. He saw them in the mess hall. Jihuan eating with his team, listening more than he talked. Sumin laughing at a story from Micha. Taeshik showing a young alien engineer how to adjust the grip on a tool. They were just people. This was the fact that unnerved Kale the most. The monster was invisible until it was needed. One afternoon. Kale was in the ship's tactical library, studying Kthari swarm patterns. He heard a familiar, calm voice behind him. "Analyst Kale, may I join you?" It was Jihuan. He held 2 cups of a steaming liquid the humans called tea. He offered one. Kale, after a slight hesitation, took it. The cup was warm against his cool fingers. "You are studying the enemy?" Jihuan said, sitting down. He did not look at the screens. He looked at Kale. "Understanding patterns leads to prediction," Kale replied. "Prediction leads to victory."
Jihuan nodded slowly.
He took a sip of his tea. "And have your predictions changed?" The question was direct. Kale met his gaze. The human's eyes were still that unreadable calm. "My data set has expanded. My models required adjustment." A small smile touched Jihuan's lips. Not a smile of amusement, but of recognition. "On Sylvanus Prime," he began, his voice low. "You asked me about contradiction, kindness and killing, the song and the gun. I did. I have been thinking about your question," Jihuan said. "Our way is not easy for others to understand. It is not always easy for us." He placed his cup down carefully. "You see, for us, the value of a thing is not in what it does. It is in what it is. A life is precious not for its utility, but because it is a life. A song is precious because it holds a memory. A patch of ground is precious because it is itself." Kale listened. This was the philosophy behind the circle. "So, when something attacks that precious thing," Jihuan continued, "it is not an attack on a function. It is an attack on a value. And you cannot negotiate with that. You can only stand in front of it. The strength of the stand comes from the depth of the value. The love is the fuel. The fight is the fire. Love, fuel, fire." Kale turned the words over. They were not clinical, but they were precise. "So your dread, your fear, it is not for yourselves." Jihuan's eyes grew distant for a moment. "The first taste of real dread," he said softly, "does not come from being afraid to die. It comes the moment you realize you have something you are afraid to lose. That is the moment you become truly dangerous and truly vulnerable." Kale finally understood the last piece. The humans were not fearless. They were full of fear, but it was a specific, focused fear, the fear of loss. And they had learned to weaponize that fear, to turn it outward as protection. Their strength was born from their vulnerability. It was a paradox that made his logical head spin, but in his heart, in the cold place where his dread lived, it made perfect sense. "Thank you, Sergeant," Kale said, "for the explanation, and for the tea." Jihuan stood up. "Thank you for the fire, Kale." He gave a short, respectful nod and walked away. A week later, new orders came. The human platoon was being deployed to a new front, a defensive action on a mining colony. Kale was assigned to a different sector, to a quiet listening post far from major action. It was a logical posting for his skills. He went to the main hangar to watch them leave. Their new ship was being loaded. The humans moved with purpose. Jihuan checked equipment lists. Sumin carried a new medical crate. Taeshik was already inspecting the ship's external gun mounts. Micha was talking quickly with the ship's pilot. They looked like soldiers. Just soldiers. But Kale saw more now. He saw the invisible circles around each of them, overlapping, creating a shared space of things they would protect. He did not know what was inside those circles on this new mission. A colony of miners? A local custom? A child's drawing on a wall? It did not matter. The Kthari, if they attacked, would find out that as Jihuan walked up the ramp. He paused. He looked across the busy hangar and saw Kale watching. For a second, the calm on his face softened into something else. An acknowledgement. Then he turned and entered the ship. The engines fired with a deep blue glow. The ship lifted smoothly and moved out through the energy field into the black space. Kale stood there for a long time after it was gone. The dread was still with him, but it had changed shape once more. It was no longer just fear. It was a grim respect, and a sorrow. He walked back to his quarters. On his desk, his console glowed. He opened his tactical software. He looked at his file, the human proportional response factor. He did not delete it. It was important data. But he created a new file. He titled it simply, A Note on Values. In it, he wrote, Victory is not the highest goal. Order is not the ultimate good. There is a thing higher, observed in a species called humanity. They call it love. It is an irrational, non-quantifiable attachment. It makes them weak. It makes them vulnerable. It makes them illogical. And when challenged, it makes them the most formidable force in the known galaxy. Our strategy should not be to copy them. We cannot. Our strategy must be to never, ever threaten what they have placed inside their circle. For if we do, we will not be fighting soldiers. We will be fighting the living embodiment of their fear of loss. And we will lose. He saved the file and closed his console. Outside his window, the stars shone with cold, logical light. Somewhere out there, a ship carried a platoon of humans to a new fight. He thought of a quiet man replanting ferns in the mud. He thought of a song about a lost bird. He thought of the cold, focused eyes of a man calling an orbital strike on his own head. My first taste of dread came while fighting alongside human soldiers, Kale thought. And my lasting lesson was this: be glad they are on your side. And be very, very careful what you define as the enemy. He turned off the light and sat in the dark, no longer afraid of the dark itself, but of what someone might do if they tried to take it away from someone who loved it. Time passed on the UGC Sentinel. Kale's tour at the quiet listening post ended. His analyses from that period were noted as exceptionally insightful regarding asymmetric threats. He was promoted. He was given a new assignment, strategic liaison to the human expeditionary forces. The irony was not lost on him. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. He was transferred to the GCS Resolve, a ship where human command staff worked alongside UGC officers. His role was to be the bridge, to translate human tactical decisions into terms the wider UGC fleet could understand. He saw familiar faces. Jihuan had been promoted to lieutenant. His platoon was now a company. They were back from the mining colony mission. The report said it had been a swift and decisive defensive action. Kale read the after-action details. The Kthari had broken against the colony's defenses. The human unit had sustained 0 casualties. The colony's infrastructure was 89% intact. It was a perfect textbook victory. Kale knew there was no textbook for what the humans did. His first liaison meeting was in a large briefing room. UGC officers sat on one side, their postures perfect, their faces calm. Human officers sat on the other. They were more relaxed, but their eyes were alert. Jihuan was among them. The topic was a proposed push into a Kthari-held nebula. A UGC admiral, a Tarkellan named Vrol, presented the plan. It was a masterpiece of logic. Pinpoint strikes on swarm coordination nodes, calculated feints, a gradual, efficient tightening of the net. This approach minimizes resource expenditure and maximizes swarm disorganization, Admiral Vrol concluded, his multi-jointed hands gesturing at the holographic map. There was a moment of silence. Then Lieutenant Jihuan spoke. His voice was as calm as ever. Admiral, Your plan is tactically sound, but it operates on a central assumption that the Ktharis' primary objective is tactical victory. Admiral Vrol's head crest fluttered in confusion. Is it not? They are a swarm. They seek to consume, to expand. They do, Ji-Hwan agreed. But on their last occupied world, the world called Lyra 3, what did they do after the fighting stopped? The UGC officers consulted their data. A Velen commander spoke. Standard swarm behavior. They began resource strip mining. They started constructing a brood hive in the largest population center. And before the strip mining, Ji-Hwan asked, what did they do to the population centers? The libraries? The monuments? The gardens? The data was there. The Kthari did not just destroy strategically. They systematically eradicated everything that was not useful. They plowed under parks. They melted down cultural artifacts for scrap. They did not just defeat a species. They erased its footprint. They eliminated non-essential structures, the Velen commander stated. To them, yes, Ji-Hwan said. To the species that lived there, they eliminated memory. They eliminated beauty. They eliminated the things that made the fight worth having in the first place. Kale watched. He saw the divide in the room. The UGC side saw data points. The humans saw ghosts. Your point, Lieutenant? Admiral Vrol asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. My point, sir, is that your plan fights the swarm on their terms. Logic and efficiency. We will win. But the nebula holds 17 stellar nations, most of them pre-spaceflight. Their worlds are not just strategic positions. They are homes. If we fight a slow, logical war, the swarm will have time to do to those worlds what they did to Lyra 3. We will reclaim empty husks. That is not a victory. It is a salvage operation. What is your alternative? Vrol challenged. A reckless, fast assault? The casualty projections would be unacceptable. Ji-Hwan stood up. He walked to the hologram. He did not look at the casualty projections. He pointed to the heart of the nebula, to a star system marked as holding a major swarm coordination hive. We don't fight their logic. We break it. We make it personal for them, as they have made it for others. We hit here, not to disable, to enrage. We make them feel the threat of loss. We make them afraid for their hive. They will stop thinking about consuming the nebula. They will only think about destroying us. They will abandon their logical spread. They will converge on us. The room was silent. Kale felt the old dread, but it was mingled with a grim awe. Ji-Hwan was not proposing a battle. He was proposing a sacrifice. He would make the entire human force a beacon of fury, drawing the swarm's wrath away from the helpless worlds. You are proposing to use your own forces as bait? Admiral Vrol said, stunned. No, Admiral, Ji-Hwan corrected, his voice quiet but clear. I am proposing to use our forces as a shield. The bait is their own hatred. We will make them hate us more than they want to consume those worlds. We will protect the things inside the circle, even if we do not know the people who live there, even if we have never seen their gardens. He looked around the room, his gaze finally landing on Kale. That is what we do. The debate that followed was heated. Numbers were cited. Risks were analyzed. Kale listened, but his mind was on Ji-Hwan's words. We will protect the things inside the circle, even if we do not know the people. The human circle was not small. It was not just for their own. It was expandable, infinite. They could choose to put entire civilizations inside it. The responsibility of that power was terrifying. In the end, a hybrid plan was approved. The UGC would execute Admiral Vrol's logical containment. The human expeditionary force would execute Ji-Hwan's focused provocation. After the meeting, Kale found Ji-Hwan alone by a viewport, looking at the stars of the nebula, swirling in gas and light. You volunteered your entire company to be the primary target, Kale said. Ji-Hwan nodded. It is the only way to be sure the swarm's attention is complete. The projected survival rate is… I have seen the numbers, Ji-Hwan interrupted gently. He turned to Kale. You once told me that my decision to save Private Day was illogical. You were right. By the numbers, it was, but there are no numbers for the value of a single life. There are no numbers for the value of a song, or a story, or a quiet world that just wants to be left alone to grow. We are not fighting for numbers, Kale. We are fighting for the things that make numbers meaningless. Kale understood. This was the final evolution of his dread. It was no longer just fear of human capability. It was a profound, humbling respect for human choice. They chose what was worthy, and they were willing to pay the ultimate price to prove it. I will be coordinating your logistics and support from this ship, Kale said. I will ensure the orbital fire is precise. Ji-Huan offered his hand, a human gesture. Kale took it. The grip was firm, warm. Thank you, analyst. Good luck, Lieutenant. As Ji-Huan walked away, Kale returned to the viewport. The nebula was beautiful. It held unseen gardens, unheard songs, unlived lives. The humans were going to throw themselves into the heart of the swarm to protect them. Not for strategy. For principle. My first taste of dread came while fighting alongside human soldiers, Kale thought. Now I understand its final form. It is the hope that one day we might all be worthy of being inside their circle. And until then, the awestruck fear that we might ever be foolish enough to place ourselves outside of it.